Hello, everybody, and welcome to my one-to-one interview section. My name is James Dearsley on behalf of What House here, and this interview we're actually very gladly joined by James Wyatt of Barton Wyatt, one of the stalwarts of the industry who's been around the bush a little bit. I hope you don't mind me saying that, James. That's a terrible thing to say. But look, I understand that Barton Wyatt are celebrating a pretty impressive achievement, really. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the agency and what you're celebrating this year?
Yeah, well, I have been around a bit. I've got the grey hair to show for it. We're celebrating 50 years of Virginia Water. It's 50 years since my grandfather bought an existing business, although we go a bit further back than that, back to 1869. But 50 years in Virginia Water. It's been through my grandfather, my father, now my brother and myself. And we're thoroughly enjoying celebrating that.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, for most agencies, I mean, you know, that's an awful long time. So obviously, many congratulations on that. And I suppose picking up on that, one of the things that a lot of people feel at the moment, especially right at this point, and bearing in mind this interview is just happening barely half a week after the general election has taken place. We're sort of aging this interview even now, but it's quite important because in all of those years of existence, one would say that there's been quite a lot of discussion in this latest general election about the property market. And I know, James, you were quite outspoken, maybe not is not the word, but you were quite opinionated about what was happening in this election. So now it's happened and the Tories are back in. What are your feelings now, as a person to start with? What are your thoughts on it at the moment?
Our thoughts now are that it was a very good result. It was a good result for property generally in the country, I think, across the country. Certainly a good result for estate agents in my area, in Surrey, London, South East, and further afield. But I mean, the election, you have to look back a lot further. Because my family have been in the business for so long, I've been brought up watching elections come and go and watching politics mould the property market, whether it's a left-wing Labour government or a more right-wing Conservative government. And what we have seen, of course, is that worldwide economics also has an enormous effect on the property market. And you only have to look back 20 years to see an enormous crash before the one we more recently had, and then back in the early 80s and back in the oil crisis in the 70s. I mean, even as a young boy, I remember the property market being absolutely devastated, but then brought back very strongly by big inflation, which was great for my parents, but it's not what we want now. So what we want is stability, and we want turnover. We want more houses being sold. We don't want runaway prices. We just want more turnover.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Barton Wyatt in particular, with what you've just suggested, I mean, I'm going to quote two of other sort of industry leaders here. We got Nick Leeming from Jackson Stockton Staff, who just said the clouds that have hung over the London property market have now dispersed. High value properties, while still affected by some of the more recent tax changes, should see more stable demand, which I think you just sort of alluded to there. You've got Alison Platt, Chief Executive of Countrywide, saying we now expect there to be greater activity in the housing market, especially in the 2 million plus markets, facing the prospect of what was one of the terms of the election, which was the mansion tax. Now, I would assume that's going to affect you in some respect with Barton Wyatt, considering your price range. Would you agree with that?
Well, until very recently, our average house price sale was somewhere around 2.7 million. Yeah. We've got a significant number of houses for sale between 5 and 10 million. The average buyer of a £5 million house is currently being faced with a mansion tax possibility under the proposals by Labour. It was £23,000 a year. I mean, that was a very scary fact. But that aside, because we haven't got a Labour government now, we've got a Conservative government. But buying a house like that, you're paying a stamp duty of £512,000 on a £5 million house. And that at the moment is crucifying the market. And what we are now calling, I mean, I've already written to my MP, Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, is to ask him to reverse these enormous stamp duty rates that they've imposed at the behest of the Liberal Democrats. I mean, really, it was a political decision to offset the mansion tax demands of the Liberal Democrats. And at the moment, these enormous stamp duty rates of up to 12% really aligns the Conservatives with the SNP in Scotland. So we will be calling on the Conservatives to have a rethink on that, because we can see further trouble in the market in the more expensive price ranges. And I personally simply don't think that a 12% stamp duty rate is fair at all.
Mm. It'll be an interesting sort of discussion, as you say, because it was put in place primarily for the Liberal Democrats as a sort of an appeasement, I suppose, is maybe the right word. So perhaps there may be a U-turn on that, which is obviously, again, at that higher price range. We've got rid of one of the concerns, but there's an existing one which perhaps needs to still be reviewed. So it'll be an interesting one.
U-turns are difficult to achieve, generally speaking. What it will come down to is whether the government can see a fall-off in receipts from stamp duty at those higher levels. And the stories you hear, particularly out of central London, are saying that the market has considerably reduced in volumes of turnover. And certainly what we've seen in this area in the last year has been a reduction in house sales over £5 million of at least 50%. I mean, it is an astonishing reduction in turnover.
Mm. Well, I should think that the new housing minister who's been put in place, and I can never pronounce his surname,
Francois.
I should think he's probably got a lot of thinking to do, because there'll be a great big hole, I should think, in the top end of that little bit of tax coming through. So obviously they need to replace it. So we'll have to see, won't we?
He's got a difficult job to do, and I do get the feeling that once again, housing has become a political football. It's something they just want to kick into the long grass. Francois, whatever, hasn't got a place on the cabinet. You do question whether they're taking housing seriously or not. They've made this wonderful promise that they want to build 200,000 homes a year. I don't see it. And actually, I'm not quite sure whether I see Mark Francois as the right person to be a housing minister. I thought Brandon Lewis was quite good, actually. So I think it's a bit of a shame that he's gone.
No, I mean, we could debate it for an awful long time. I actually, funny enough, I'm of the opinion that if it was a cabinet position, it would become more of a political potato than if it wasn't a cabinet position, because maybe it might sort of slunk under the radar. They've got 5 years now to sort of turn these things around. And I think the next 6 months are critical in terms of how that possible U-turn may come in. So we'll have to see. But let's just talk about for a second the housing market in general, because obviously I'm aware of your position within the NAEA. And obviously with Barton Wyatt, you're very much at the top end of things. With your affiliation with the NAEA, you probably see a far more of an oversight within the role that you have. Yes. I mean, there's other issues that with the risk of Labour having was obviously the cap and the lettings market. I presume that's probably been a big sigh of relief within the rentals market out there. Is that something that you're seeing, or are there other big sighs that you're seeing where people are relieved that the Tories are in?
I think my members in Surrey, I mean, I have actually just stood down from my position as chairman of the NAA in Surrey, but I think there is a universal sigh of relief that we've got continuity with the Conservatives, rather than having a Labour government imposing yet more red tape and more difficulties for us, and for tenants, for purchasers, for everyone. I mean, the Surrey members are completely relieved.
There's no surprise, I think, that the stock market on Friday had a huge rally, especially in those very, very sensitive housing stocks at the moment, which is quite incredible.
Yeah. It's not surprising. No, it's not surprising. People like continuity. I mean, that's not to say that it's wrong in having a different government. I mean, actually, when the Labour government came in 1997, I think there was quite a lot of relief in the stock markets because they're all fed up with the Conservatives. But we've now seen that completely the opposite has happened. So
it's a very interesting part. There's a final question, James, for this. Let's sort of look ahead. Given the monumental decisions that had happened last week, given your position in the marketplace, have you got any thoughts and theories as to what's going to happen for the remainder of this year? Now this has occurred. What are your thoughts?
At the moment, it's very unsure. You'll read in all the newspapers and online, for instance, that there's been a flurry of activity, particularly in central London. You'll see in the home counties that quite the opposite has happened. There's been a rather comforting, muted response. We've seen a lot of people coming into our office relieved that we've got a Conservative government, but the level of activity has not really risen at all, and a lot of other agents are saying exactly the same thing. I think it'll be a slow burner. We'll see more confidence coming back in over the coming months. And what is really astounding at the moment is that if you want to go out and buy a house, particularly expensive house, the downside is you're paying these enormous rates of stamp duty, and the government have to realise that that is a problem that they've got to face up to. But on the positive side, the cost of borrowing money has reduced to levels that I just cannot believe we'll ever see again. I mean, you can get a 2-year fixed mortgage for less than 1%. You can get a 10-year mortgage for 3.2%. You know, this should be a very good time to buy, and particularly if you're buying at under £1 million, it is a fantastic time to buy.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, there's one thing bringing on, you mentioned about the expensive side, because there was one question I did forget to mention, because it was of great interest to me given other discussions I've had, and I think it's particularly interesting for the estate agency market, where are we now just people who are helping people buy houses, or are we something more? I know you've suggested in the past that your very high-end buyers are expecting more than just an estate agent. So perhaps you can just allude to a little bit of where you see that market going in terms of what I think you've termed as your private office, I think is what you've termed it as. Just to sort of talk about that and tell people your theory behind it all.
Well, we've had a private office for the 50 years that we've been here, and that started when my dad came to this office and found that there were quite a number of people who lived overseas, didn't live in their houses very much, particularly in the armed forces, and there were a number of expats, non-DOMs type of people, and they needed people to manage their houses, but also to provide a bit more, an extra service. And we've been carrying that out for a long time, and actually it's evolved. So we've never actually made it public until last September, when we had a more open launch, if you like, of our private office, because it's changed into something very different, where we're now dealing with very, very large houses that are 20, 30, 40, 50,000 square feet, with owners who, I mean, some of them bring staff by the coachload. I mean, I've got one customer who has 50 staff in the house, and that takes quite some looking after. And we've been doing it a long time, so we can provide that sort of service, and not many agents can. But these sort of people, they want exceptional service that goes way beyond the call of duty. I mean, when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, you get an order for £20 of fillet steak. I have to say, I don't blink an eyelid anymore. I used to think, what on earth is going on? But soon you get a list of butchers who will actually get up in the middle of the night and sort it out for you.
Wonders will never cease in the estate agency market. It's one of those things, isn't it? It makes for great stories, James, which I'm sure you
can have us.
On that moment, look, let's leave it on that, because I think it's a great place to see. And look, on behalf of What House, many, many congratulations on the 50 years in Virginia Water, and what a legacy your family have left in that area. So it's an amazing achievement. And look, for anyone out there, I mean, just to sort of conclude, that was James Wyatt there from Barton Wyatt, joining us for our one-to-one interview series within the whathouse.com series. So I do hope you'll join us for the next one. So thanks, James. Thanks ever so much for your time.
Pleasure.